Now, we come to the sections on mathematical sciences. It is our honor to have Professor Tom Wan to be our moderator. May I invite Professor Wan, please?
It is my honor to be invited to moderate this section. Okay, I'm going to introduce to you Professor Koller and Professor Rosen for their Shaw Prize in Mathematical Science 2017 is for their remarkable result in many central areas of algebraic geometry, which has transformed the field and led to the solution of long-standing problems that had appeared out of reach. Okay, so my job is to explain to you what algebraic geometry is and their job. But this is really a challenge. Okay, to explain it, the term algebraic geometry in layman terms, naively, you may think of your high school algebra and high school geometry and put them together. Of course, this is too trivial, and it certainly won't reflect the significant contribution of both professors. Okay, and but in a way, this is really a study of the geometric and the algebraic structure of some geometric object divided by equations, so-called algebraic equations for you. And it's because of this, it's in the middle of the common area of several major fields of mathematics, such as number theory, geometric analysis, and so on, complex geometry, and all that. And even in modern day, high energy physics, which is the famous string theory, okay? And so this is a hard job for me, so therefore I will let the laureate to tell you more about the subject. So let me first invite Professor Koller of Princeton University.
So, thank you very much. It's a great honor to be here. And so I will try to illustrate a little bit how you can take high school algebra and high school geometry together. And if you do the mixing in the right way, then you get a Shaw Prize after a while. And so I would like to talk about some algebraic surfaces. And so, well, so I would like to start with some examples of surfaces. But surfaces are everywhere. So, you know, if you are sitting on a chair, then you're sitting on the surface of the chair. If you're walking somewhere, you're walking on a surface. And yesterday, in my lecture at the Chinese University, I talked about some complicated surfaces that have interesting grids made up of lines and circles. Today, I would like to show you some examples of some interesting surfaces that are made up of interesting grids on them. And so let's start with the first example, which is an airport tower in Kobe. And one reason I really like it, because you see, first of all, you see the circles. So the surface is made up of these circles. And there are two sets of lines. It's a little harder to see, but there are some lines that sort of go to the right and some lines that go to the left. And so, well, the surface is an example of what's called a one-sheeted hyperboloid. And I just found out a few weeks ago, through digging through some old journals, that actually the first person who might have discovered that the one-sheeted hyperboloid, it has two sets of lines. It was Sir Christopher Wren, who then went on to design St. Paul's Cathedral in London. So it is very nice that this example now exists in architecture. Well, I hope that many of you actually have seen this in real life. This is the Canton Tower, which again, the surface is a hyperboloid, but here the architects designed to have an interesting twist, that they have the left-going set of lines, but they did not add the right-going set of lines. Instead, they added some interesting spirals to it. And so that again, they started with the same mathematical structure that was before, but made it architecturally more interesting. But this is a local example. I think it is the facade of the art museum. So here you can see that this is made up of some vertical lines, and then the horizontal curves, they are ellipses. Except again, the architects made a little twist that here on the right, instead of this ellipse going back this way, they added a little tail to it. So they sort of start basically the mathematical structure, but then they make it something more interesting, more pleasing to the eye. Then this is a museum in Shanghai. So from my point of view, this may not be a really good example because it has lots of flat surfaces. So left side is very flat, the right side is very flat, but where the two flat surfaces meet, instead of just creating an edge, they create these very nice looking grids which look more or less like hyperbolas that connect the two surfaces together. Then an old example, I think it's a 10,000 life vase that again is, I believe, here in the art museum in Hong Kong, and then here the artist arranged, I believe, 10,000 characters, meaning long life, along this grid. So again, there are the circles that go around, and there are some more complicated curves that go along the edge. This is probably more or less a degree 3 algebraic curve, so it's more complicated, but this is a nice example of artistic illustration. Again, that if you create an interesting grid, you can get some very nice pictures out of this. And then, well, with 10,000 long lives, maybe you can actually live longer than the universe. We don't know that. Okay. Now, well, this is, well, the first approximation. This looks like an armadillo, but in fact, it's at the Science Center in Glasgow. Again, you see here that there are these vertical-looking elliptic lines, and it's harder to see, but there are these horizontal line structures. They again look like ellipses. Now, then this is the Viceroy Hotel in Abu Dhabi, where again you can see two nice sets of ellipses that create the roof. This is again an example I hope that many of you have seen, is the National Theatre in Beijing, and especially on the right-hand side, you can really see both the horizontal and the vertical ellipses that go completely around the building. Start at the front and they end up then at the back. And then this is a somewhat more interesting example from my point of view. It is the new roof of King's Cross Station in London. If you just look at the lower part, then it looked like two sets of hyperbolas, but then in the upper part, where they introduce a third set of hyperbolas. So the lower hyperbolas continue going left, going right, but then a new set of hyperbolas comes in. Okay? And so these were just some architectural examples of some surfaces that you can assemble, so some grids of relatively simple curves. Now, my main interest as an algebraic geometer is to understand more complicated surfaces, and so I like to look at the high school algebra part that write down an equation And on the other hand, I would like to understand what kind of geometric object do I get out of these equations. And so my main interest is understanding sort of all possible surfaces, not just the ones that are simple to draw, but everything possible. And especially try to understand then how these surfaces, they can develop with time. I think I'm more interested in sort of short time development, not long time like Professor White. And so now, next I will show you some especially nice examples. And so you should think about this like if you like to watch birds, then when you start, you are interested in the especially colorful ones. And then when you become an expert, then you might become very much interested in some little bird, which is just brown, but it's rare in your area. But so the first approximation, at the first step, you are probably looking at some birds that are very blue or very red or yellow. Now, these pictures were created by Professor Herwig Hauser in Vienna. He can do what I think a really spectacular job. So let me just show you some of his examples. So each case, I don't know, can you see the equation? It's at the lower end, and then there is a surface. And so the color is just added to it. So what the equation tells us is only the shape. The color is only put there so that you can see it better. Here's another example. Well, here is the next one. And you see what I especially like about it, that there are some very simple equations, just a few monomials, and you add them together, and you get these really amazing looking shapes. Okay? Well, if 4 people want to drink at the same time, this is very convenient and handy. Then there is two flowers together. This is nice blue. Again, the equations are very, very, very simple. Okay, so here maybe there are 3 parts of it. Okay, now the equations start getting a little more complicated, and you get this shape starts to look like a starship in some movies. And again, now here we start getting into more interesting coefficients. There's a 10,000 there. That is exactly 10,000. It doesn't matter, but it should be something reasonably large. Okay, here's another one. Okay, now then I would like to show you some equation that depends more on exactly how you choose the coefficients. That's a famous degree 6 surface discovered by Professor Barth. There is this unknown phi in it, which in fact you have to choose very carefully. There has to be precisely the golden ratio. And then if you do that, then you get this picture. So this is made up of lots and lots of pieces, but the pieces exactly touch each other. So those 2 cone parts, they touch. Okay, and now finally, I would like to show you just a little bit what can be done with an equation. That if I look at an equation like this, then how do I start to actually analyze it? So then I look at this equation, and now, as you have seen, most of the surfaces we have at most parts are nice smooth, but there are some interesting parts where the surfaces, they self-intersect or they develop something like a cone. So these are the features that I would like to find. And now it turns out that for this I need to compute the partial derivatives, where there are 3 of them. And then I have to solve this system of equation. Now this can be rather complicated to solve such a system, but in this case, it will be the x-axis and the z-axis. So something special will happen along the x-axis and the z-axis. And there are some 2 special points. Let me not say exactly how we see it at the origin and 0, 0, minus 3. Now, then another thing we can do, you can notice that if you write this equation like this, I just rearranged the terms a little bit. this looks like an ordinary degree 2 polynomial in Z. Now, if you want to solve a degree 2 polynomial, then in middle school or high school, you learn that you have to write down its discriminant, the quadratic formula. So then again, I did that, and it is the discriminant that tells you something interesting. So then you compute the discriminant, and you would like to figure out what it is. Now, maybe at the end of high school, you learn that you can switch to polar coordinates and, in fact, solve this. And then, well, this is not that hard to graph, and you get this shape. So that means, please remember that the x-axis and the z-axis where something interesting happened, and there is this shape. And now, well, if you think a little more, then you can get a movie going about this. I think someone else is supposed to get the movie going. Yes, and so this is the movie. The z-axis is vertical, the x-axis is the horizontal, and again, it looks like it's rotating, but in fact, we are flying around it just like, okay, now here is that shape, the cat's eye shape, the upside-down cat's eye that we computed. That's the discriminant. There is a special point, 0, 0, minus 3/2. We just flew around it to see it. Again, you see that two part comes together. And then we fly around it again from the other side, again, see what it is like. And then, again, if you back, okay, it's a little slow, so we are at a low warp speed. Okay, well, you can see that along some axes, two branches of the surface meet here at the lower end, and now what's vertical now is like a paper is just folded. So these are the things. We are back at the original surface. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Kolar. Please return to your seat on the floor. Now, I would like to invite Professor Vazan to deliver her presentation.
I decided not to give a general overview of my work. I don't think that would be very useful. I wanted to discuss a notion which is very important in geometry. I think there are two basic notions, which are the dimension and the degree, and I am going to discuss the degree. So we started saying that algebraic geometry is putting somehow algebra and geometry together, and the degree is something that we know very early when we learn what is a polynomial, and so it's the case where the degree is very easy to define. If you consider a polynomial, P, so it's a formal expression, combinations of powers x to the I of a formal variable x, and you consider only n such n plus one such term, and the degree is the highest power for which you have a non-zero coefficient appearing. So we have this easy notion of degree. And when we have several variables, and the polynomials, they are combinations of monomials. Each monomial is a product of powers of the variables, and you make a combination of them. And for each monomial, the degree will be the sum of the exponents. Okay? So for a general polynomial, we will so it will be a combination of all these monomials with a given coefficient, and the degree of P will be the maximal degree of a monomial effectively appearing in the polynomial, so that we have a non-zero coefficient in front of it. But so, of course, particularly interesting are for us in algebraic geometry the homogeneous polynomials, for which all the degrees of the monomials effectively appearing are the same. So we say homogeneous of degree D when it is a sum of combinations of monomials of a given degree. So sigma of I k is a given d. There is a process which may look very artificial. It's an algebraic process which is called homogenization, which allows to starting from any polynomial in several variables to make it homogeneous. And the trick is to add an extra variable x0 and to multiply each monomial which appearing, which might be of degree smaller than d, by the adequate power of x0 in order to get the degree d. So it's a formal operation. So what is formal is a priori not very interesting. What is nice is that this operation is we will see a sort of geometric version of it when I will explain what is a projective space compared to a fine space. It's a way of looking at what happens at infinity. We have been discussing what means for a space to be infinite, and so this notion of finiteness or infiniteness in mathematics is summarized into being compact or not compact. And mathematicians, for me at least, they definitely do not like non-compact things. So we like to see what happens when we go at infinity. And so for this, we want to add points at infinity, and projective geometry is an example of that. And the homogenization process, it's a sort of algebraic step to achieve this compactification. And you note that the original polynomial p, it is just recovered from its homogeneous version by restricting to x0 equal 1. Okay, so we lost nothing in that process. Okay, so that was algebra. But now I am going to speak about something totally different, which is topology. And we said that we are going to put together algebra and geometry, but in fact we are also putting together algebra and topology. And it's something which is a priori very different, because in algebra, well, we will deal with polynomial functions, very highly regular functions. And in topology, we will consider a priori only continuous function. And a notion of major importance for the development of the topology, and I would say also for a foundation of modern mathematics, is the notion of the degree. So let me explain in a few words what it is. So you consider an open set inside the Euclidean space, R to the n, and you consider a continuous or maybe differentiable map with value in R to the n. The key word here is proper. Proper is the notion of compactness for a map. Proper, that means that when you consider a point in the image, you consider it's a pre-image, that is all points that are mapped to it. You don't want that they can go to infinite. So, for example, when your point u in V tends to a certain value in the open set V, then you consider all the points which are mapping to it, they are not going to infinity. So that's the notion of properness. So how are we going to define the degree of this map? It's a fundamental result, it's a theorem of Sard, which says that for such a map, most value of are regular, which means that if you consider any pre-image, any point mapping to U by this map, then the differential at this point will be an isomorphism. The differential is a linearization of the map, and that implies by the inversion theorem that the map is a local isomorphism between a U and a V. Okay. Now there is a crucial point to introduce here is the notion of orientation. So you have this linear map at each point in the pre-image. It is an isomorphism between the two tangent spaces, and a linear map either it preserves the orientations or it inverses the orientation. So typically, the identity map, x1, x2 maps to x1, x2, it preserves the orientation, but the map which exchange the two variables, x1 and x2 maps to x2, x1, this one changes the orientation. Okay. And the degree of the map f over the point is you count the pre-images, so by properness you have only finitely many of them if V is a regular value. And the point is that you are not counting them in a naive sense, you are counting them with a sign. And the sign will be positive if the map does not change orientation near, and it will be negative if the differential changes orientation at the point. And so that gives you a number, and the crucial, the main theorem of the theory is that this number, in fact, is independent of the choice of the regular value V, as long as your V is, so you need some essentially connectedness statement. Of course, you should be able to pass from any value to another one continuously. So you want the V to be made of only one piece. And then that means that you get out of this a number which does not depend, in fact, on the point where. So here there is an example. So in fact, this curve that I have here, it's the same as the real line, and I consider as a map the map which projects to the vertical map, which projects vertical projection, which projects to the x-axis. So you see that if I am here, I have as an inverse image only one point. Okay, so that gives me degree 1. If I am here, again, I have only one point. But what happened in between is that I have 3 points, 3 values over each, for example, here, I have 1, 2, 3. And the point is that there is no contradiction. 2 of them have to be counted with positive sign and one with negative sign. And that's the reason why finally the degree is always 1 for all the values. So, okay, so this is now there is a tricky thing in that story that, in fact, this curve is more or less the graph of a cubic polynomial. So, in fact, what we are counting here is you have a polynomial of degree 3 in one real variable, and for each value of x, you are counting the number of solutions to the equation p of y equal x. So, and it is painful that we started from a polynomial of degree 3, and we find that this map has degree 1. And the reason is that we are not over the complex numbers. So they are missing pre-image, which will appear if we were in the complex setting. If we were working over C, in this situation, we would get three roots for all values and of the parameters. Okay, so So I wanted to say something about the space and the ambient space and how to make the space compact. This is our favorite space in algebraic geometry. It is a projective space, so it's a way to make compact the usual flat space. So here, the usual flat ambient space, it's this affine space here, z equal 1. As you can see, it parameterizes lines in the ambient space R3. But when the line goes to infinity, when the point goes to infinity, the line that you get becomes more and more horizontal. So basically, to construct a projective space, we add to this affine space R2 what is called the circle at infinity, parametrizing lines which are horizontal. So now projective manifolds, they are defined inside the complex projective space by homogeneous polynomial equations, homogeneous as I explained in the first beamer. And the degree of such a projective manifold can be defined in some sense as a topological degree. So it's here that I use the fact that I am working with a complex projective space. Suppose that your complex manifold has a dimension n. You choose a linear projection from your big CPN to a smaller CPN by the linear projection. Is just forgetting about the number of variables. There is you have to assume that the center of projections, where all these coordinates vanish, do not meet your x. And then you can define the degree as the topological degree of this projection. And in fact, here I assume that the variety is algebraic, but in fact, that definition works as well in general for complex submanifolds of the complex projective space, which are more generally defined by holomorphic equations. And I wanted to explain a very important result by a famous Chinese mathematician, Zhou, slightly less famous than Chern, but for algebraic geometry he proved a very important result. And one of his famous results, which have been very much used and generalized, is the fact that if you consider a complex manifold in CPN, so a priori defined by holomorphic equation, it is in fact algebraic, that is defined by polynomials, that is homogeneous polynomials. And in fact, the same proof will show an even stronger result, that if you have any complex algebraic variety in projective space, or complex manifold, it's the same by the first result. If it is of degree d, it can be defined by polynomial equations of degree d. And that the proof is, well, it's explained here. I think it's too late to give the proof. So I stop. But I just wanted to add the two remarks. The properness was a crucial notion to define the degree, and this is the projective space here. It has been used to work with a compact ambient space, so that, for example, these projections they are proper because they are maps between the compact spaces. And the second point is why complex numbers work better than real numbers in that story. It is the fact that if you consider a holomorphic map like the one which we got by considering this linear projection restricted to a complex manifold, its differential at any point, it's C-linear, and because of this, it preserves the orientation. And that means that in that setting, when I compute the degree, I do not have to make an alternate sum with a minus or plus signs according to the orientation. You get only plus signs. So the degree is just a naive degree of counting pre-images. So I'm going to stop now.
Thank you very much, Professor Bossan. Please take a seat here on the stage. The question and answer section is about to begin. May I also invite Professor Collard and Professor Wen to be seated on the stage too.
Should I go through this question first or let the audience ask first? Okay. Any question from the audience? Huh? No? Okay. Oh, that's right. One over there.
Thank you for the very interesting talks. I would like to ask a question to Professor Collard. First, you mentioned that you approached the study of surfaces which move throughout time. And since I'm interested in the same field, maybe I would like to ask a suggestion for my research. How would you proceed to study the interaction of two surfaces which moves throughout time? And in particular, how do you handle the interpenetration of them, assuming that they cannot cross each other? Thank you.
And so I think this is indeed a very, very hard question. And so I think if I could stay here for a whole semester and give a lecture course, I could answer. But yeah, you are completely right. This is a very, very difficult question.
Thank you.
Okay. Second questions? In the middle.
And now my question is a lot more general because I'm a year 3 medical student from HKU. And I find all this mathematics very complicated, but at the same time, I'm sure that it has a lot of very important uses in the real world. And I just want to ask, like, not so much about the research, but how did you find yourself pursuing this particular topic of mathematics? Like, I imagine you didn't know from a very young age that you were going to study algebraic geometry one day. Like, what was the journey like that led you to being so interested in this particular topic? Thank you.
Of course, when you start in mathematics, you don't study first your research topic. So I followed many courses in other fields, like, for example, Riemannian geometry, differential geometry, complex analysis. And the reason I have been attracted to algebraic geometry, I think, is what I like very much in algebraic geometry is that maybe you are aware of the fact that in the 60s, algebraic geometry has been totally refounded by mainly by the Grothendieck school. Well, it was not only in France. After a while, also many people visited France, and finally so the fact is that within 10 years, this domain, which had existed for 200 years, which had started very much in the complex side in the 19th century, suddenly it was given an incredible theoretical body of definitions. The idea being that things should be funded rigorously. For example, here I explain things which may seem very bizarre. Namely, I started from polynomials, this is algebra, and then suddenly I did topology. And typically, algebraic geometers in the 60s, they wouldn't do that because they wanted to refund everything from inside algebraic geometry with, so for example, typically I use what is called the usual topology of the ambient space, and the modern algebraic geometry does not want to use that topology. So you create first the Zariski topology and then the étale topology. Okay, so to give examples that showing that this domain is extremely knowledgeable. So I liked the fact that there is such a beautiful theoretical body. But on the other hand, what is remarkable is the fact that there are many beautiful objects. Precisely what Collard showed is that there are so many interesting shapes, and shapes for us there are several classes of varieties with very different, very distinct properties. And it's a little specific to algebraic geometry that we have both large, very beautiful theory and a large variety of interesting objects to study. So it's nice because first of all you feel clever when you learn the theory, but then you can also really attack using it on a specific object, your favorite class of market. So finally, to answer quickly your question, it's I liked many sorts of geometry, but this one I appreciated. I mean, well, by for aesthetical or very really personal reason of a good balance between this the mean general theory and practice being faced to certain natural object or explicit object.
Thank you, Professor. How about you?
So I started algebraic geometry in the spring of 1979, when my algebra professor told me that nobody can understand algebraic geometry, that is too hard. And then I was young and I was proud, and I decided that I show him that there is someone who can understand algebraic geometry.
Thank you.
Great. Actually, this is almost the same question here, so I can skip this one. Okay. And from the audience again. Okay.
Here's a question for both the professors. So can you comment on the relationship between geometry or topology with physics? Do you believe that geometry provides the ultimate answer to our understanding of the universe?
So I believe the ultimate answer, if I remember right, is 40. Yeah? 42, sorry. So the ultimate answer is 42. But and so for some reason that is actually a total mystery to me, and I think to many people, mathematics can be used to describe the universe very, very efficiently. And I really don't understand why this is the case, why this should be the case, that the purely logical part of mathematics can actually describe the universe very well. And so it is possible that the mathematics is the only thing we have, and maybe at some point someone will discover a completely different discipline that will match the universe much better. You know, the quantum world has a very complicated mathematical description, so maybe there is a simpler non-mathematical description, but it's maybe someone from the audience will find it.
Professor.
I think there are two parts. I mean, if you believe that a certain model is meaningful physically, then we mathematicians we work with a mathematical model. So it's a way of not answering the question. We know that what we know is that our field can be useful to study certain mathematical models of the universe. Assuming that I know what is the universe. So in particular, we have been particularly concerned in the 90s since the 90s by the development of string theory, where they, for some reason, physicists concluded that the good vision of the universe with 4 dimensions, so 3 for the space and 1 for the time, will be, in fact, a 10-dimensional object, geometrically, made of the usual 4-dimensional one, cross a sort of a compact geometry, which is 6 real dimensional, but in fact 3 complex dimensional. And so there was this notion of Ricci flat, which in the complex setting became what we call, due to the work of Yao, Keller-Einstein matrix. And finally, the emphasis due to the work of these people. So I am not sure if it is really serious physics, but for us it was very nice, because suddenly the Calabi-Yau trifold became extremely fashionable, and we were we were encouraged studying this geometry. So there is a small problem that this geometry, there are many of them, and they have moduli, so they deform. So that I'm not sure that the universe is supposed to have so many parameters. But so it's to give an example that I cannot really answer your question because it has a sort of a philosophical dimension. That is, I think the problem for everybody is the fact that even not mathematically, but that we can understand anything in the real life and in the universe, it's already extraordinary. What I want to say is that, well, once you made this modelization, the example of string theory was one, then we really can do geometry and then we can do serious things.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, I think it's time for some question on my hand. I just received one very interesting one. I think everyone wants to know that. The question goes like this one. Why now we use X, Y, Z to show 3 dimensions? Okay, so we can picture that for them. But is there any way we can visualize high dimensions, like 4, 5, 6 dimensions?
And so I can only see 4 and 5, and I have to close my eyes to it. And
Me, I am happy with the high dimension.
Okay, what about the picture, the movie you just showed us? So.
And so I really cannot, maybe I can give some analogy here. So, for instance, if you look at a picture of someone, then there's a 2-dimensional picture that you see, but you understand right away that it's a 3-dimensional object. And so, for instance, if you look at the 2-dimensional picture of someone, you have no problem understanding that there's a person there, and the person is 3-dimensional. This does not bother you at all. And so I think sort of the same way, if I can see sort of 2 pictures of a 4-dimensional object, then I can sort of see that there's a 4-dimensional object, that someone took these 2 different pictures. So that this picture shows sort of this 3rd dimension, the other picture helps me imagine the other 3rd dimension. So out of these 2, I can, especially if I close my eyes, I can sort of start to see something what happens in dimension 4. So I am reasonably good at imagining dimension 4, or to some extent I can do, if I have 3 pictures, then I can get to dimension 5. So after that it becomes very unreliable. I can sometimes...
So maybe I wanted to add something. So for dimension 4, if you think that one dimension in this time, it's very easy to understand it conceptually. And not only conceptually, of course, the notion of dimension is conceptual, but also, I mean, to show theorem in dimension 4. So there is this example, the notes. The notes are figures that exist in dimension 3, and usually the note, by definition, it's an object which is complicated that you cannot remove it without breaking it. So the typical example is these 2 rings that one is taken into the other, and so you cannot break it, you cannot remove it without breaking it. Now, think that I have an extra dimension which is time. Then that figure does not exist anymore for a very stupid reason that one circle, in the direction of time, I will move it, and the other, it will stay at time 0. And then they will be in a different time, and so they will not meet anymore. So that's an example showing that you can, well, if you pass this obstacle of the vision, you can really go to higher dimension and say something.
Okay. Since this time is almost up, we only have time for two more questions. Okay, this is one funny one. Let me go for that because they quoted Einstein. Albert Einstein said, imagination is more important than knowledge. But maths, like algebraic geometry, is too abstract. It is hard to imagine. Okay, there's one word I cannot read. So what's supposed to be fruit do you have to make you a great mathematician? What have you eaten to make you a... Okay, maybe apple.
What do you have?
Traits.
Do you have to make you a great mathematician? So I think I'm a good mathematician, but I'm not a great mathematician. I've known only a few great mathematicians, so I think you should ask them.
I am following you. Maybe it's not so important being great or not great. I think that if you are the mathematician that you want to be, some are very careful, some are more creative, and some like to prove a result with a great generality, some others prefer to find, maybe focus more and discover some funny things. I mean, the question is to, I think, being original, being yourself in some sense is very important. And also, I should say that with this emphasis on great scientists, it's not very good in general. It's something that I want always to insist on, that one scientist or two scientists is not science. We have a community, we form a community. And this community is essential because of the discussions, because of the seminars, because of the courses, and because also a scientist may be great at a certain time, and after a while he is not that great, he's simply an old person. So we need to transmit science, and we need to see arriving new people with a new mind, more original way of looking at things. So it's more important to think to science as, or at least maybe a specific field, even algebraic geometry, really as something which has some structure with many people having a role in that.
So can you say something to those first graduates in mathematics who want to pursue for a higher degree in mathematics? They want to be a graduate student, and do you have some advice for them?
Well, so I think that the advice was given by Professor Byte was really the best one, that you should do what really interests you, especially are young. If something interests you, then you can learn much faster, and just try to do that. And then, so I think that probably that's what unites us, all the Shaw Prize winners, that from a young age we did what we were interested in, what really drove us. And well, maybe I can speak for everyone. We probably did not follow the advice of our professors too much.
Maybe on a more personal viewpoint, I will add that life, or maybe professional life, it's not always interesting. I think we are very lucky as scientists to have an interesting life, which started when we studied. So when you are students, you should really benefit. Take profit of it in a maximal way. Maybe after a while you will renounce because it's hard to get a position, or because you do not get enough money. But then the danger is that sometimes you regret after that your life has become not as interesting as when you were a student. So I think that that period where on studies is really the beautiful one. Even for us, the period where we discover the field, it's really marvelous period.
Thank you very much. Thank you both.
Thank you very much, professors. Please return to your seats on the floor.